So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming this morning. And welcome to this third webinar on stories of use cases organized under the data.europa Academy. So this third webinar is going to be on the topic of open data and a new push for the European democracy. These series are based on inviting real use cases, real examples, successful stories to show how open data can be like powerful and be at the cornerstone to create challenge and to tackle global challenges and to move towards a data green transition. In the past webinars, we tackle how open data could contribute to the European Green Deal, and also how it could move towards economic growth with an economy that works for people. In this case, we're going to go towards our democracy, or rule of law, transparency, and all these aspects that are very important for our society nowadays, and the political priority, a new push for European democracy. But before we get started, I'm going to remind you some rules of the game. So this webinar will be recorded and the slides will be available on the data.europa Academy. After this session, you will also receive an email containing all this information. So you will get all this material accessible for you. Please ensure that you're muted during the webinar, which doesn't mean that you cannot place your questions on the chat. Please feel free to do so, because we will matters a lot to us. We want to know what you think about this webinar, how you would like the Europa Academy to provide you solutions in the future, training sessions. So please reserve 3 minutes after this webinar to help us improve and filling or feedback form. So this is how our agenda looks like today. So I'm going to be the moderator and introducing the topic as such for the whole session. But then the most important part is like getting to know these two successful use cases from the EU Integrity Watch and also the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information from Georgia. And then afterwards, we're going to have like an open panel discussion where we're going to get to know more about these applications, how they shape the future of our democracy, and also hearing your questions at the end of the session. So please stay with us until the end, because the discussion will be very interesting. But who is in the room here today with us? First of all, I'm going to introduce myself. So my name is Inma Farfan Velasco. I work at the Publications Office of the European Union on the Open Data Reuse and Innovation sector, and I'm project manager of the data.europa Academy and other stakeholder activities. We also have today here Rafael Kergueno. So he's going to present the EU Integrity Watch. He's a senior policy officer who has been working on Transparency International since 2016. He led the anti-corruption movement into the data-driven advocacy in order to enhance transparency, accountability, and freedom of public institutions in Europe. We already got to know him in 2020 because he participated in our EU Datathons, or open data competition, presenting very innovative applications to boost our democracies, the digital future, etc. We're going to get to know more about it, so I'm not going to spoil more information now. And he also co-designed other applications apart from the one that you're going to get to know today, such as Track My EU platform. And he was the winner of the challenge, A Europe Fit for the Digital Age. Then, apart from the speaker, we also have Teona Turashvili, who is the head of local government and civic tech and innovation department at the International for Development of Freedom of Information, or ITFI. And she focuses on a wide range of topics such as open data, open government, e-government reforms, data literacy and innovation. She also coordinates and leads the establishment and the maintenance of the Open Data Lab and the regional hub for Eastern Europe and Central Asia and the Global Data Barometer. So she's going to bring like the Georgian perspective on this matter. So having said this, we're going to move into the introduction, or why we're making such a webinar and why we think open data is important on this political priority. So as you know, the European Union is founded on the values of respect of human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality for everybody, rule of law, and respect of human rights, including right of person belonging to minorities. So We already saw it with the Ursula von der Leyen Commission in 2019, that she set up several, like 6 political priorities in which she was going to focus her mandate. In this case, the new push for democracy wants to boost the democracy and protect our democracies, because if there is something that we should be aware of, is that it's not something that we shouldn't take it for granted. We have to protect our democracy. We have to cultivate it every day, nourishing, protecting, and strengthening with different tools and actions in our everyday life. What it means in practice is that we don't only need like policymakers to make regulation and policies to boost our democracies and transparency. That is something very important, but we also need to involve citizens in the whole process. That's why it was launched the Conference on the Future of Europe that was closed last year in 2022, where we're inviting different citizens to have their say and to share initiatives to shape our democracy and the future. So Europe is based on unity, and unity is based on different economic, socioeconomic values, such as, for example, freedom of independent press, which is something very important in order to ensure that that we fight disinformation and misinformation in this case, upholding the rule of law, making sure that the judicial process are independent and we have like trustworthy judicial systems. Fundamental rights that we can see already in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, and also equality for all that we could see already in some strategies. This comes together like with the European Democracy Action Plan that is focused on having free elections, which means having more information, reliable information of the funding of political parties, also on how they advocate and they promote the content on European elections. It's also very important to let other speak up, and also to have access to reliable information. In this case, the free media, and that's why we have the EU Code for Disinformation and other initiatives in order to ensure that the press is free and people have access to different sources of information. And this is very much linked also with no disinformation and other initiatives on this respect. But moving forward, we mentioned the fact that we have to provide information to citizens. We need to ensure that governments and public administration are as transparent as possible and accountable in order to protect our democracy. But here there's like a cornerstone element that we should mention and we should not leave behind. That is the fact of access to information. So accessing to information is essential to give power to citizens. The better the citizens are informed, the better decisions they are going to make in the future, based on evidence, based on trustworthy information, based on data. And here's where open data plays a very important role. So we could say that open data is nurturing as well our democracies. So open data empowers citizens to make decisions based on reliable information. We give access to data through different sources, such as, for example, data.europa.eu, or these applications or these projects that we're going to hear about today. We give citizens access to make their own assumptions according to this information. It's not only a very powerful tool for citizens, but it also helps governments and public administrations. They help them to be more accountable and more transparent about how they're using the funding, in which projects they are spending, what is the different correlation between the different regions, etc., etc. And at the same time, it helps to fight disinformation. That is something we are seeing today. We are never being in such a moment in our life where we have such a processing of information all around us. We have a lot of access to information, but at the same time, we have to make sure that it's digestible, and we fight against fake news, and we're not moved into one direction or another based on completely biased information. So with the power of trustworthy information from reliable sources such as public administrations, national entities, etc., we can get access to this information. So that's why it's very important to advocate for this. So what is the role of data.europa.eu here? So data.europa.eu is the central point of access to EU information coming from national, regional, and local public administrations, but also from EU institutions such as the European Commission, in this case, for example, Eurostat, European Parliament, and other EU agencies. So we want to scaled up and build up from this access to information. We want to provide reliable resources to understand what is in which what are the current projects on this respect. That's why we invited today two very specific like speakers who contributed to two projects that we're running now. So one is the use case observatory, that is a 3-year monitoring exercise in which we take 30 reuse cases to really understand the economic, governmental, social, environmental impact of open data. So as we want to track the progress, we want to track how they're in which direction they're moving towards, because sometimes you need this type of exercise to really understand where we are, where we're heading. And Theon is going to talk to us more about it, because they are participating on this exercise. And then also, apart from these studies and these reports that we have on data.europa.eu, we have the open data competition that I mentioned before. So it's UDatathon that invites teams, in this case, Rafael participated, to develop applications to show how open data can address political priorities. So we really try to take the robust way of information and to leverage from it in order to achieve like a major goal. But I think I spoke enough for now, and now it's time that we get to know more about this wonderful project. So I'm inviting now Rafael Querbueno to present. So the Integrity Watch monitors the integrity of EU institutions, and he's going to talk more about this project. So Rafael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Inma, for this fantastic introduction, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Rafael Carreno. As Inma said, I'm a Senior Policy Officer for Transparency International. So for those that don't know, Transparency International is the global anti-corruption movement, and I work for the office based in Brussels. Inma, can we go to the next slide? And I work for the office based in Brussels, and my specialty, as you can probably guess, is the use of open data to help our advocacy, and very much a big specialization in the field of political integrity. So today I wanted to present to you one of our flagship initiatives, which is Integrity Watch, and have a specific focus on lobby transparency. And why I decided to focus on lobby transparency is because I think it really much fits within a new push for European democracy, because lobby transparency is really a way for citizens, journalists, academics to gain better access to EU decision making, but also to basically hold to account the decisions that are being taken. Next slide. So what is Integrity Watch? So Integrity Watch is a platform that empowers citizens, journalists, and civil society organizations to directly enhance EU political integrity. The original platform was launched all the way back in 2015, when the Commission took a monumental decision of publishing for the first time lobby meetings. So this platform that was originally launched provided these lobby meetings in a user-friendly format, in the form of interactive graphs, interactive tables with advanced search functions, and could provide the users for the first time a much better understanding of how lobbying worked in Brussels. But it's not just lobbying. We also provide nowadays lobbying of the European Parliament and declarations of financial interest of members of the European Parliament, as well as their declarations of travel. So we're just trying to sort of like cover the full integrity system. The platform itself has been extremely successful, with now over 15,000 users per year, hundreds of media articles, and dozens of academic research articles as well. And this platform has been so successful because the technology that we use is actually relatively simple. It is really about a data realization platform that became accessible at the time to organizations such as ours, which is a civil society organization. And that also meant that we were trying at some point to recreate the success that we had in Brussels into other member states. Next slide, please. So if you look here, we actually been quite busy in those 5 years. In 2018, we started scaling up the geographic scope of Integrity Watch quite dramatically by adding 8 new EU member states. This project that was funded by the European Commission directly understood that we could create these applications fairly easily, but also expand the type of data that we showed in the different member states. For now, we are providing up to 32 data sets in the field of asset declarations, political finance, also lobbying, as well as public procurement in 11 member states. The scope of the project now covers 43% of EU citizens, and we've also deployed the platform in the United Kingdom. And the future looks pretty good. For the Interactive Watch 3.0 project, we will be adding up to 50 plus new data sets. We will also, as you can see in the countries in yellow, these will be all the countries that by the end of 2023 will have the Interactive Watch platform, as well as you can see in the Western Balkans. Next slide, please. But the thing is, it requires a lot of effort for us. And you might be wondering, why do we actually engage in trying to build all these tools all around the EU? And that's because of data-driven advocacy. So data-driven advocacy allows us to raise awareness on the issue that matter for us. So for example, through the platform, we provide a window into the position that we defend on lobby transparency, the prevention of conflict of interest, as well as the prevention of fraud in public procurement. The analysis that we do, which is sort of more of a light touch data analysis, highlights the best practices and gaps in the rules that govern ethics in public life, which allows us to create targeted advocacy recommendations. And this is very important because when we then sit down with policymakers, we have empirical evidence that support the recommendations that we formulate. And of course, the fact that when we start collecting and providing hard-to-reach data to citizens, we also showcases to the public institutions how useful this can be. And usually we create a cycle that by providing the data to citizens, we convince the public institutions to further open up the data, leading to better data standards. And this is really the third element that today I want to focus on by explaining how we use the Interactive Watch platform to achieve much better open data standards for lobbying activities in Brussels. Next slide, please. But let's start with the basic. What do we have in Brussels? We have a legal instrument, which is the EU Transparency Register. For those that are maybe not aware of, the EU Transparency Register is the register of lobbyists where lobbyists can highlight all key information pertaining to their activities. This is the basic details, the goals that they pursue, the number of lobbyists that they hire, the financial data, also all the funding that they receive, both from the EU, from public sources, but also from other sources like foundations. So as you can see here, you see the entry for Transparency International. And the reason why this is important is that the lobby register itself is also tied to a code of conduct, which ensures that lobbyists act in a certain ethical way. It also allows for public institution and anybody else to understand which type of organizations are active in Brussels, and thereby understand how the decisions are made. Now, the definition is extremely encompassing. Basically, it covers all types of organizations that are involved directly or indirectly into lobbying. So that means that they communicate with the EU institutions, and therefore, once they communicate with the EU institutions, they should register. Now, the data sets themselves, not yet. Thank you. The datasets themselves are made available in machine-readable format and directly downloadable on the Open Data portal. And for those that weren't aware of this, this is an extremely rich dataset because it contains information about 12,000 organizations, which makes this one of the largest lobby register in the world, probably. Now, there are still a couple of problems because there are different reporting requirements depending on the type of organization. And I'm mentioning this because if you do engage in a certain type of analysis, you have to understand what you will be able to see. So organizations that represent commercial interest, they report on the financial data, the amount of money that they spend directly on lobbying activities, whereas civil society organizations report their entire global income. So that means that the financial data for civil society organization does not necessarily pertain to their lobbying activities, but allows you to understand what is their total operating income worldwide. There's also another issue, is that the fact that the register is not mandatory for all three institutions. It is only mandatory for the European Commission. Now, this is still a very good point, because when I say mandatory, it means that if an organization is not registered, it means that it cannot interact as a lobbyist with the European Commission. What it does in practice is that if an organization that basically pushes organization to try not only to register, but it also pushes organization to significantly improve the data quality, because they want to make sure that the information that is on the register is correct, which therefore also helps us by producing much better analysis. Next slide, please. But how do we actually use this register? So the register itself has this very interesting information. But the next step in terms of lobby transparency, and for us to understand how decisions are made in Brussels, is to also measure what is the lobbyist impact in Brussels. And here in 2014, the then at the time president of the Commission, Juncker, took a monumental decision, which was for the first time ever to publish high-level lobby meetings. So these are meetings that were held with the commissioners, cabinet members, and director generals. And I cannot understand how monumental decision was but to the best of my knowledge, this was the first time that a public authority in the world decided to be so transparent and open about the interactions with lobbyists. Now, this is very interesting because we could start trying to analyze these lobby meetings and see sort of like various different parameters, like what is the share of civil society organization? Is there a relationship with the amount of funding and the amount of access? What are the most important topics that are being targeted by lobbyists? And I will come to that in the next slide. But how was this published at the time? It was actually spread out over 90 different plus pages of the European Commission website. So you can imagine each commissioner had one transparency section, every cabinet member team had a transparency section, and every director general. So the first integrity watch, for the first integrity watch, we had to build a very complex scraper that would collect all this information and then produce a single file that we then uploaded on the platform. The problem is that it is quite resource intensive. And the second problem is that we have to keep track of the 90 different pages, because every single time there is a change, either as a cabinet member or maybe a commissioner or more complicated director general, we had to make sure that it was reflected on the platform. And in theory, given our resources, we knew that we were not capturing all lobby meetings, and we also knew that the resulting data set would always have a discrepancy with the actual amount of meetings that were really published. Nevertheless, we still managed to get this first insight, but what we decided to do, we started to reach out to the entity that handles these lobby meetings and ask them if it was possible to create a single database of meetings. Now, the answer was yes, but we couldn't necessarily know when this would happen. And lo and behold, in 2018, I actually accidentally discovered that we would have access to the database, because when you go on the single entry of each lobby organization, you see a very small PDF button. And this PDF button, when you click on it, it generates a list of meetings. And that meant that basically, instead of scraping all the pages of the commissioners, cabinet members, and director generals, we could simply start scraping all the pages of the transparency register, download each list of meetings that are directly generated from the database, and make sure we always have the correct number of meetings, because the transparency register is always up to date with the lobbyists. So it's still not the most straightforward solution, because we still needed to scrape those 12,000 PDF files and compile them in a single database. But we noticed that it was significantly more correct. And that's also meant that we could start making more in-depth analysis. Our original analysis was more sort of showcasing who were the top commissioners with the most meetings. We could try to see what were the top policy files that were targeted, but we didn't go much deeper than that. With this new data set, we decided we could actually go significantly further, and we produced quite an in-depth report into big tech lobbying, and really see from every single aspect how this actually worked in practice. And we'll come to that a little bit later as well. But nevertheless, and this is always the case, and I'm sure for those of you engaged in collecting open data, that sometimes things can go a little bit wrong. Because we were using the PDF documents, the Commission had to change the licensing of how those PDF were generated. It's a very small detail, but the licensing meant that the structure of the PDF documents changed quite dramatically, to the point where for us to adapt it would require so much resources that we simply did not have as a civil society organization. And we decided at that time that maybe it was really time to convince that we do the final push, which is a data set that is published in open data, clean and interchangeable with the transparency register. And this required quite a bit of back and forth with the technical staff, but ultimately we've achieved this. This is what you see here, which is the entry for Transparency International on the JSON file, which was finally made available in 2022 and published on the data.europa portal. And this is really also another milestone because, to the best of my knowledge, this was also the first time that we had access to such a data set with lobby meetings of all lobby meetings published since 2014 in open data, to the use of unique identifier that can then be interlinked with all the information that was published on the Transparency Register. And that's really sort of like kind of like a gold standard in terms of publishing lobbying activities. And go to the next slide. And so that means that what can we actually see in this data set? So you have here a picture of the Integ2Watch platform. Every single graph is completely interactive. And by just using the graphs, you can get all these kind of like information that you see here. So we have a total of 19,000 meetings published since the start of the mandate. You can see that through these 19,000 meetings, that lobbying really is a very important aspect of the Commission day-to-day work. The top three portfolios, unsurprisingly, are the European Green Deal, the internal market, and the financial services. There was also, as you can expect, a marked uptick in COVID-related lobbying during the pandemic. The companies and business association represent 55% of all meetings. This is actually quite a decent number because in the previous commission, the companies and business association represented 70% of all meetings. And for us as a civil society organization, we have a core recommendation to make sure that there is balanced aspect for different types of stakeholders. But the only way for us to formulate that recommendation is to come with empirical evidence that there might be a bit of an imbalance. And this recommendation was then actually acted upon. And as you can see now, nearly 30% of all meetings are held with civil society organizations and other types of non-commercial entity. The remaining ones might be think tanks, academics, etc. The commissioner with the most meeting is Thierry Breton by far. So he really is the top commissioner being targeted by lobbyists. Unsurprisingly, because he's in charge of internal market, which means that a lot of rules that are pertaining, very technical, pertaining to the single market, and therefore most of the companies will probably want to deal with him in one form or another. The top organizations, and you can see this is very diverse for the top three. You have Business Europe, which is sort of the umbrella organization that represents European businesses and SMEs in Europe, that is at the top. But then you have the Trade Union Confederation, which is also a new fact of this commission. This was not the case in the previous one. And then Transport and Environment, which is one of the major NGOs that is active, as you can guess, in transport and environment. Next slide, please. And so why does it matter for democracy? So the data that is being published in Integ2Watch EU is being used by academics, investigative journalists, civil society organizations all around Europe and in the world. Even yesterday, I was contacted by a PhD student from Maastricht University that was doing a full research into civil aviation lobbying. And we had a very nice chat on the data that was published on Integ2Watch. We also ourselves do a sort of like in-depth report. As I mentioned, this is the report on big tech lobbying, where we can see sort of like using big tech as an example to draft a recommendation and kind of see how, unfortunately, at the time, big tech was really dominating the policy files that are pertaining to the digital single market. And after which we saw a correction and an emergence of more engagement by civil society organizations. And of course, also for citizens themselves, the fact that lobby transparency exists and that it can be published and viewable directly on Integ2Watch foster a greater understanding of how decisions are made. But it also lobby transparency also simply enhances citizens' trust. There is always this perception, that lobbyists are has a very negative connotation. But the fact that we have transparency kind of dispels this feeling a little bit. And also makes citizens understand that there is, to a certain degree, and pardon the word, nothing to hide. So I would also reflect what Ima said in the introduction. The use of open data certainly leads to open governance. The use of open data certainly leads to better transparency, accountability, and integrity inside the EU institutions. And the future really looks bright, because the more we open up data, the more we go further with this. And our objective with Integrity Watch is not simply to display data, to monitor the information that we publish, but also to start interlink them together. As we recall, we have this map all around Europe that is being covered in Integrity Watch platform, and our objective to really help to fully understand the linkages between lobbying, political finance, and public procurement. We will be starting to interconnect those data sets together to really make a platform that enhances integrity in all our public institutions. And that's it for me. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to all your questions.
Thank you very much, Rafael, for this very insightful presentation. I already noted down so many questions that I might have for for afterwards. Okay, so moving forward, we're going to go now for the Institute for Freedom of Information from TEONA. So it's an NGO that makes governmental data from Georgia openly available for users and evaluates transparency of Georgia's government institutions. Having said this, TEONA, the floor is yours. Looking forward to listen to you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you hear me well. So as well, it is a great pleasure actually to be presenting here and to share our experience. As it was mentioned, I represent IDFI, the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information, based in Georgia, and we are a non-governmental organization which aims to support the development of an informed and empowered society to foster democratic governance. And in our activities, actually, data has the most important some kind of role, because we believe that it is a driving force for a democratic and prosperous society. And to give you some kind of our beliefs and major approaches, in a nutshell, I can say that IDFI's DNA is that information fuels democratic and prosperous societies. It empowers citizens to hold governments and businesses accountable, governments to better respond to citizens' needs, and businesses to design innovative and growth-oriented solutions. And we actually base all our activities on these some kind of strategies what we have. And if you, I would love to overview how we came to this data lab portal, which is one of the important portals for us. But historical overview of our activities also is very connected to the challenges what Georgia had in terms of access to public data over the past years. And in general, organization was founded in 2009, and we started these activities regarding access to public information directly once it was established. And first of all, we have been requesting public information from all public institutions, because back in 2009, actually, even journalists did not have information that they had the right to request public information from public institutions. And this way, actually, on the one hand, we wanted to ensure that public institutions provide data, and on the other hand, we wanted to encourage journalists also to request data. And we have been publishing this data what we have received from public institutions. Even sometimes they were in PDF formats or even some hard copy documents, but still this way we wanted to promote this use of this right among citizens, journalists, and activists. And apart from somehow requesting data, one of our aims was to somehow assess to what extent public institutions were in line with FOI regulations, what we had in Georgia. And this way, and actually we made a ranking of public institutions based on their compliance with FOI regulations. And annually we have been presenting our report, and we have been naming the most transparent and closed public institutions based on their responses. At the same time, we have been monitoring websites of public institutions because we have been advocating for the standards for proactive disclosure of public information, and actually later, based on our some kind of based on our monitoring results and our some kind of overview of international standards in this case, in this regard, in 2013, Georgia adopted standards for proactive disclosure of public information, and based on this regulation, actually, there is a list of public institutions which should be disclosed by public institutions with particular frequency, and it's mandatory for them. And this was very important achievement for us. And of course, we have been using all these reports and some just the challenges and problems we have been revealing over the past years based on this monitoring to improve access to public information legislation and practice. And for example, in case of practice, based on our annual assessments over the past years, the compliance rate of public institutions improved by doubled to some extent, even though over the past year we had some challenge and huge drawback in terms of the overall performance of public institutions. But in general, it's obvious that awareness of public institutions and their capacity was improved. And also later, actually, we decided to use all this data what we had accumulated over the past years, because if we have been actually requesting thousands of public information from hundreds of public institutions, and not hundreds, but all of the public institutions to some extent, not only from central public, government institutions, but also from municipalities as well. And we decided to use this data for holding government accountable, especially since we had this approach of requesting particular standard questions, we called them, which meant that particular data, we have been requesting particular data annually. For example, information such as bureaucratic expenses, representative expenses, or some expenses of particular programs of government institutions. And it meant that we had the opportunity to overview the tendency of the Georgian bureaucracy to some extent. And we decided to somehow makes publications out of this data. And also, the most importantly, we have been also somehow observing how public money was spent. And also we had some specific publications on healthcare, social and economic policies of government institutions, etc. So for us, to what extent our some kind of organization focus was also expanded, and nowadays organization actually has six strategic directions working on anti-corruption, of open government, social and economic policy, local government, and different fields. To somehow get to our some kind of major focus, what we have today is our platform, data.lab.g. So as I already overviewed from the very beginning, we started with this requesting public information, annual assessment of public institutions. Afterwards, we tried to use this data for analysis, but on the other hand, we understood that this accessibility of this data is very important for general public as well. At the same time, we have been advocating for the development and implementation of open data standards in Georgia. And even though the government open data portal was established, but we don't have common standards in Georgia in terms of open data. And also it's not obligatory for public institutions actually to publish their data in open formats on this central open data portal. And actually, in order to showcase for public institutions and also for societies, for society, how important it is to have access to open data, we decided to create our civic open data portal, and it's called data.lab.g, and the main aim is to encourage the use of open data for different purposes. And from the very beginning, we actually started publishing the data what we accumulated from public institutions. As I mentioned before, sometimes this data we are in PDF formats or we are scanned documents, and we had already actually converted them into Excel files when we have been analyzing different policy areas. And so the portal has this function of converting Excel files into CSV format automatically. So we had just manually had to somehow create these data sets in Excel format. And afterwards, when we have been uploading it, later users could exploit in open formats, and the users also can visualize and make some very simple visualizations on the portal as well, and download these visualizations and use them for the articles of or for other some kind of publications. And also, of course, it's free for use for everyone. They can even download these data sets, also share with others. And in the future, actually, we have this ambition of promoting and encouraging users, for example, even IT companies, to use our data sets for creating new services or some innovative applications. But it is for future, because as of now, it's of course it's very challenging to get this data and collect this data from public institutions when they don't disclose this data in open formats. And as to give you very to give you details very briefly about our some kind of success stories, and also about the methods we are using to encourage users to use data, and also to increase their capacity. So I will enlist some of the activities. First of all, we have annual essay competition called Data for Change, and we encourage users to use our data, what we publish on the data.lab.g, and also we encourage them to request public information for these essays from public institutions, and make some deeper analysis on particular public policy issues. And actually, we have already implemented for such kind of competitions over the past years, and it is very successful, because all our annual some kind of contest shows that they always prepare some analysis based on ongoing some kind of development in the country. For example, we had some articles about climate change or environmental issues, gender equality, and some other related topics, which is very much relevant for the society. And also we have some awareness raising activities and some materials as well. You see here publications, three publications which was developed by IDFI, and we actually in these publications we show and we try to share all the practical information and tools, how to monitor government, how to collect data, how to analyze data, and how to prepare some investigative articles based on this data. And actually, and apart from somehow gives them guidance how to use data, actually, we somehow teach and show them how to collect data from different registries and official portals. Because, for example, in Georgia, we have this SS declarations portal of public officials, public registries such as the business registry, public procurement platform. And also we have a platform for donations of political parties. And also we have this portal on budget, which was implemented by a state audit office. And with the combination of all these platforms, they can make very important analysis actually. And as I mentioned already, we used all these some kind of activities in order to improve our legislation as well. I already mentioned this adoption of this decree on proactive disclosure of public information, but nowadays we are advocating for adoption of a law on information, access to information, which will be a separate law, and it will improve some safeguards for access to public information. And also we are advocating for adoption of open data standards in the country. At the same time, we have a legal aid program for journalists because they don't have enough experience to go to courts when public institutions refuse to provide them very important information. And also we help them to write proper freedom of information requests based on our legislation, because sometimes public institutions use very when you are using very vague terms, they just try to not to provide you proper data. And also we have very important, very successful strategic cases, namely actually when we had cases when public institutions refused to provide data to us, if we decide that it's a very important case and this is a public information and it is interpreted improperly by public institutions, we started strategic litigation in several cases. And for example, we had a successful case when Supreme Court of Georgia ruled that official email correspondence sent or received by an official email account of a public institution constitutes open public information. Another success story was the fact that information on administrative expenses and internal audit reports of public institutions was somehow was regarded as a public information, and now it was a very important case for us. And we had other some kind of successful cases, but I just highlighted these two ones. And also in case we see that there is a political will from public institutions to improve their open data management systems, we share expertise with them. And for example, we had some projects with the support of international donors with several municipalities, and we helped them to analyze what kind of challenges they had. And also we created special guidebook for civil servants and trained them. And also we helped Tbilisi City Hall to create an open data portal concept. And if this concept will be implemented properly, they will have a very important open data portal, which will somehow enable them to publish very important municipal data. So this is very briefly about our some kind of work. And during the discussions, I will be happy to answer your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Teona, for this insightful presentation and how you support journalism and free access to information. Thank you so much. So we can see here that we have two very different approaches to different goals, but somehow they serve for the same purpose. So based on this presentation, we're going to move now to the part of the panel discussion. So yes, so on how open data can support our democracies based on this presentation. In the meantime, while I'm starting with some questions for our audience, please feel free to drop your questions on the chat. I already see a very interesting question that I can't wait to share with our speakers. But I'm gonna start myself. Teona and Rafael, thank you very much again for your intervention. Really appreciate it. I'm going to start with you, Rafael. So regarding the EU Integrity Watch, I think it was very important when you were mentioning how the essential fact of that you provide with all your efforts, with all your resources, a window into reality, and the fact that we have to provide more reliable information about the lobbyist activities and so on. And this was only possible when they released this data in 2015. So based on this question, and the first question that is going to be more like on the operational level, is this application free with for free access, free use, and does it provide a multilingual translation?
So thank you very much, and also congratulations, Deona, for a fantastic presentation. I really like it. I'm looking forward to discover the app. So to answer, yes, the application is entirely free of charge. In fact, every single InteractiveWatch platform deployed in the EU and also in Western Balkans in the future will be free of charge, and all the data is provided into one single hub, which is the InteractiveWatch Data Hub, where just upon registration, anyone can just download all the data sets themselves. So this is really sort of like a key principle, because we are using public data and we want to make sure that everybody can reuse it directly without any transformation or blockages from us.
Perfect. Maybe you can share later the link with our participants so they can get access and navigate through it. Rafael, can you hear me?
Yes. I mean, sorry, you're cutting off a little bit.
Yeah, I know. Like it was telling me that I had like some connection issue. Apologize for that. Also, I think something very important, Rafael, that you were mentioning is about how important it is to visualize the information and not to have access to basically just the raw data, but also like bringing it to actually to communicate and visualize this data. So, is there any key finding that you realized when you were visualizing this information? Was there any surprising fact or any information that you would like to bring to us?
At the time, and this is especially true when in the previous commission, when we looked at the data and we saw the share of meetings, one of the surprising findings is that we actually saw that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something interesting to know, is that the type of organization that had the most meetings with the European Commission were actually US-based organizations. Now, this can be for various reasons, because we saw that they may be more well-resourced, also some of the largest organizations in the world, but some of them had more meetings than some of the largest organizations based in Brussels, like Airbus, for example, or Volkswagen. But there are various, the thing is that it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it also prompted us to try to understand why this was the case. And if you then look at sort of like what the priority was at the time, it was the creation of the single market. So it was also quite normal that that these type of organizations like Google, Facebook, etc., were quite active in Brussels, and this was also reflected in the budget that they started to spend, from lobby organizations that were really mid-range at the start of the mandate to some of the top ones with the biggest spenders at the end, also showing that they were taking seriously the regulatory power of the European Commission itself. So I think that that was definitely one of the striking findings that we had at the time.
Exactly. Yes, I see that this platform is somehow, it gives like a gateway to information on what are the core topics that are in the political agenda of Europe in general. Also, that it can be like a very important way to visualize what is the most important topics that are now under stake. Deona, now I'm going with you. So regarding your presentation, it was very, very insightful how actually you listen with journalists, you encourage to request the data, because somehow it's something we are fighting for also on data.europa.eu. We wonder ourselves sometimes who uses this data, how are they using it. So sometimes we need to interact with our users a lot to understand what are their needs, and according to that, provide them better services. So I wanted to ask you, how do you interact actually with your audience through the data lab? Do you undertake some exercises with your users, or do you only like liaise with public institutions to publish data on your data lab?
Yeah, it's a good question, and also it's a challenging issue for us, but I can share with you some of the activities we are implementing. And to some extent, we are quite successful in case of journalists, because we have our network of journalists with whom we are cooperating. And for us, they are the ones who are somehow coming to us once they need data. And sometimes we have even consultations about how where to find this data, and if it's not available, we also help them to get this data and to be somehow sometimes even representatives on their behalf. And as for general users, so in this case, I think that we have a lot of stuff to do in the future, but we actually try to somehow promote the information about this portal, and also not only information about the portal of our portal, but in general to promote the idea of using data actually for their some kind of research or government government oversight, some kind of purposes. And for example, actually, even when I was studying at university, I have not yet about this opportunity to request data. And I see now lots of students even approaching us, and they somehow sometimes we sometimes assist them in requesting data, or they even request on their own already. And before, actually, only lawyers would know about this right, and now we see that the awareness of public the general public is quite increased about this right and about the ways how to request data. And also, as I mentioned about the standards of requesting data, apart from these standards on proactive disclosure of public information, this time in 2013, the standards of requesting data was also elaborated, and cities and this decree also includes the ways how citizens can request data online as well, and it somehow simplified some procedures for them how to request data. Even though afterwards these regulations on e-signature was approved, and it somehow complicated this process for them, because they had to have this e-signature and they had to register on governmental portal, which is a central portal for receiving services. But still, now they have it's easier for citizens to request data, and to some extent, all these activities combined somehow increased the rate of requests from citizens from public institutions. And of course, we also in the future we think that we need more some kind of awareness raising activities, and also activities such as called datathons or hackathons or something, in order to promote the use of data not only for government accountability, but also for creating new services, and to get private sector engaged in this area as well, because we think that apart from this transparency argument, we have this economic argument as well. And sometimes when public institutions are reluctant to disclose data in open formats, it's important to communicate with them as that it's very good for economic development for the whole society as well.
Yes, I fully agree. I think you made a very good point here when you were asked when you were mentioning about data demands, because sometimes as data providers and public administrations, we think only about forcing data supply, but there is a very important component about this interaction with citizens in order to understand how important it is for them to get this data. So I'm happy to see that there's like a change of a mindset from the society also, because they feel that they are under the right to have access to this data for the public good. So and this is actually pushing and encouraging public administrations, governments, different lobbyist companies, etc., to boost data sharing and put them available for everybody. That is something we're trying to move forward. Rafael, I don't know if you would like to add a few your comments about that, what you encountered from your side with the lobbyists.
No, absolutely. And I think it's an extremely valid point to also say that the use case is not purely about transparency, but they're also very much an economic value and added benefit. If you look for the lobby organizations themselves, they use this data not only to sort of compare where they are in comparison with the other organizations, but it is also used to sort of like analyze in much more in-depth sort of the effectiveness of their strategy. So on the economic front, I think it's clear that the use case is there. And I would also say sort of more top level of saying that, you know, the public institutions releasing open data is really the use case is not just economics and transparency, but it's sort of like every aspect of society can benefits, and people can sort of combine the data in ways that I didn't think was possible. I had, for example,
Yes. Mhm.
I had an academic, just to give you a very, very concrete example, that looked at the relationship between lobby meetings and organizations that would hire former MEPs and see if that actually increased access to the institutions or not. So, and the result was yes. And this is sort of like how you can see sort of the concrete results of this kind of analysis.
Yes, yes, yes. I fully agree. Also, it gives light to how important like having publicly available information about the lobbyist activities on this respect. And for me, it's very surprising that it happens after in 2015 they made this information available. No, so it raised awareness about how important it is in order to make such application that it's bringing such economic value. Regarding reporting, there's something in your presentation that I saw they were very much aligned was how important it is to report, and sometimes it's necessary regulation and some legislation coming from top down in order to make public administrations or institutions, organizations to cooperate actually. So we need to have more legislation, open data policies in place in order to make this happen at all levels, of course, and ensuring that there's the safety of data privacy. So on this respect, Teona, I'm aware that according to the use case observatory, there was this yearly reporting that you were doing with some institutions. So could you tell us a bit more about that to the audience, and as well, like how does it work, how the public institutions in Georgia work with you? Do you see them like very actively involved? Do you see some regions more involved? I would like to know more about this report.
Yes, because actually this is one of our some kind of major strategy to encourage them to publish data. So in our report, we make a ranking of public institutions, and this ranking actually encourages them to have good performance. And also, since we are doing this annual assessment since 2010, they already know this about this some kind of report, and also we name the most transparent and the most closed public institutions annually, so it is some, if they are open for cooperation, of course, and also they would love to improve their data management systems. They are cooperating with us, and actually we had several years ago we had a huge project with the support of international donors when we trained their FOI officers, and also and somehow it was a very good demonstration that they wanted to improve their performance in this ranking, and also in general their performance in providing data. And also I remember we had a very some kind of we had some other cooperations with several public institutions. One was about civil service bureau, which has been dealing with the website of assets declarations of public institutions. And in this time, this portal was not open for general public, and journalists had to request these declarations for each public official. And when we analyze how many somehow requests actually they received from public institutions, it was huge. And we even calculated how many days their servants were wasting time on these requests. Afterwards, when they created this portal, these somehow requests decreased significantly. And it was one of the demonstrations when we tried to show them that if you publish this data which is demanded from the society, then you will have less bureaucracy. And this was one of our some kind of cooperation with the public institutions, and actually with the consultation with them, we created this list of public information which could be published by them and with a particular frequency and without any some kind of request from the society. So in this case, of course, there were cases when public institutions were open for cooperation, but also we had very bad cases when individuals actually have been somehow incremental in improving or worsening the performance of public institutions, meaning that, for example, if high management or ministers were changing and they had different mindset and they were not for cooperation with public, with general society and especially journalists, of course, it's difficult to convince them And also we have cases when, for example, we request or maybe journalists are requesting information on very sensitive topics, so they don't disclose this data. And in some cases, we go to the court afterwards. So of course, we have challenges, we have achievements as well, and the most somehow worrying situation what we have is now is that we see that from the central public institutions there is reluctance to disclose very important data, not only to us but also to journalists, and it is somehow related to existing political crisis in the country, because the government and the opposition is so there is a huge disagreement with different political issues, and when we are requesting data on these very important political developments, so we don't get data. And also even government administration nowadays, we have problems of accessing decrease of government administration, and while this type of data was somehow expected to be published proactively. So we have challenges, but we have some kind of success stories as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I agree that in somehow when you are establishing such an assessment, sometimes you may find some actors more cooperative than others. But it's something that's why sometimes like to promote the good work, to undertake this exercise every year may make some more local public administrations to participate is something we are also, in case you are not aware of, we're having the open data mandatory report every year. So we invite over 20 over 27 member states. So we go also to other countries. Georgia participates in 2021, and we try to track the progress on quality, portal, impact, and policy. So on this respect, we can see it's true that we can see that there is more cooperation at EU level. So yeah, hopefully this will continue and we will keep progressing on this respect. Rafael, I had another question for you because and actually I think it's linked to one of the questions that our audience had, because we can see here, as we were mentioning, actually from both sides, how intensive is the work behind on data quality, data cleaning, all the resources that are necessary for that. And sometimes you are some people may be wondering what's the added value of all this work and everything, because you have to set up a team. There has to be some know-how on how to do it and everything. So I was wondering, Rafael, how did you start this path, and what was your main ambition that made you come where you are now, to have created this application and to actually showcase such information? And also I would be very grateful if you could tell us more about other side projects that you have under the EU Integrity Watch, such as the Red Flags story, because it's something that you presented to us, and it would be very good to present it to the audience.
Yes, thank you. And indeed, we really started from very humble beginnings. And just for the audience to understand, I absolutely have no background in either web development or data.
Okay.
this. I'm actually a political scientist from start, but I understood when we started building the platform, the sort of like really the added value of linking this data to our political priorities. But of course, at the time, we just didn't know if it would be successful or not. Not only we didn't know if we would be successful with the platform, because it's the first time, at least to the best of my knowledge, that Transparency International was building a web application. But we understood that because the technology was maturing, and for those that want to know, it is JSON, it's JavaScript visual libraries mixed with Python scripts, because I saw a question in the audience. But it is quite certainly sort of like quite straightforward data visualization technology that was accessible to us in a rather cheap way. And when we saw that the first sort of analysis of the data that we had collected, the impact it had, especially among journalists, was, I cannot understate it, immense. The launch of the IntellectWatch platform was cited in over 1,000 media articles worldwide, because it was also the first time that the whole world could actually see and gain an insight into the work, the lobbying work of the Commission. And then when we started adding other types of data, for example, the declarations of financial interest of members of the European Parliament, the lobby meetings of members of the European Parliament, there is a similar interest that's being picked up by the press. And of course, us as a civil society organization, one of the levers that we have to raise awareness about the issue is the press. And then with this awareness, we also saw that the number of users started to increasing and started diversifying. Probably initially it was more sort of Brussels-based stakeholders as well as the press that were using the platform. And slowly but surely we saw that there was a huge diversity of different stakeholders, to the point where now we are making the argument that IntellectWatch itself is not only a tool for our advocacy, but it's also a public good in itself. And this is why we also sort of like, we could sort of gain funding, and mostly actually from the European Commission, to expand the platform. And one of the main expansion that we did that Inma is referring to is the IntellectWatch Red Flags platform, which I think was probably one of the more complex projects I had the chance to work on. So we decided to develop this for the Data Fund 2021, where we became a finalist, and actually we were only 2 people developing it, which was me and my web developer Chiara Girardi, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately. And this platform basically takes all the data, all the public procurement notices that are published on the central database of the Commission, which is TED, and flags them for potential risk of fraud and corruptions. Now, of course, the flag don't necessarily mean that there is a risk of fraud and corruption, but the point of the tool is to help people navigate the more than 10 million notices that are published on the database, and to help them navigate and to try to understand, okay, why are certain types of service areas, such as construction work, why are they flagged more than others? Why are certain regions in the EU flagged more than others? And this kind of helps gain a better understanding, and not just simply with what we call maybe a negative messaging about careful, there might be corruption here, but maybe more of a positive messaging of careful, maybe some authorities or some practices in certain parts of the EU maybe need to adopt best practices and learn from others to try to avoid certain flags from occurring that could be indicative that something is not quite right in public procurement. And this is helpful not just only for us, but academics and civil society, but the Red Flags platform adds another element, because we know now that law enforcement agencies are also using it for their own purposes. It is a tool that they find quite fantastic. It doesn't go as far maybe as some of the other more advanced tools that they might have, but it is certainly something that we prepare in such a way that is easily connectable with other types of data, and can help in their work of trying to enforce the law. So this is one of the main expansion, but we're really not going to stop there, because as you saw, we are trying to cover the entirety of the EU in IntellectWatch platforms. And as the global movement, we are also thinking now of moving ahead, and perhaps also deploying in the United States, Canada, Japan, of creating sort of like the single largest database in the field of political integrity that exists, and it will be open to all to analyze and use, which really, I think, in terms of helping with the fight against corruption and making sure that decisions are made in the public good, is an essential component that we now have available to us.
Sounds challenging and very ambitious. So good luck with that, Rafael. Really, I think like you have all the tools necessary, and also like the possibility to do it. So looking forward to seeing how it develops and it goes to US and Japan. So I'm not going to steal more time from you on my questions. So I'm going to move towards the questions from the audience. So based on your short on your reply to the last question, Rafael, Helena was asking what are the IT tools necessary to develop such a platform.
So very short answer. So as I said, it is really the visual library that we use from sorry, next. The visual library is including Python script, but just so that you understand, I'm not the tech person behind the platforms. I'm the one that designs them from head to scratch. So this is really sort of a bespoke kind of like way of designing the platforms that I've developed that also brought the cost down. And then we have the developer that is really the one that builds the tool on a technical level. So unfortunately, anything that is related to the actual tech is something where my knowledge is quite limited. But what I do know is that, yes, we have the JavaScript visual library and we use Python to build the tool. Of course, also a little bit of HTML involved in that.
Okay, thank you very much for the reply. Tiona, there's also a question for you. It comes from Manuel. He asked, how can we guarantee that data in this portal is complete and accurate? And he mentions that there could be some manipulation or disinformation. How do you actually make sure that this information is accurate and trustworthy? What is the strategy for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, when we are publishing data, it's important that it's accurate and complete. And in this case, we have this strategies that, of course, we are relying on mostly on public data. So we don't publish data which is created by us. So we just maybe categorize some data, but the first source of this data is public information received or maybe obtained from public institutions. And sometimes we somehow categorize data based on the datasets which is available on their websites as well. But of course, still there could be chances when particular data sets published by public institutions is not accurate. So in this case, we don't have enough resources to double check this data. But for example, we always follow data on crime statistics in Georgia because Ministry of Internal Affairs sometimes change the methodology, how they are collecting data. And that's why we are following how this data is reported annually. And in this case, we follow to some extent how this data is published and also what are the tendencies in this data. And also we look at the methodology. So I can say that the only thing what we have is to check the methodology, how government institutions are collecting data. And if there is a concern and if we see that there is a problem in this, in the methodology, so we always report such kind of cases. Yeah, so this is the way.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I agree. In terms of, for example, as a use case, on data.europa.eu, we normally give credentials to a specific open data representatives or correspondents from different public administrations we work with, and they're responsible for this data. But of course, they are responsible of the information that they publish on the website. So this is important to also mention. There's one question from Eulalia that I found very interesting, and maybe we can discuss between the three of us. There was one on what are the main steps to move from open data to an app. I can kick it off. I wish I had like the perfect solution or perfect reply to this. I think there are different processes, and not always the same structure works. But I would like to hear more from Rafael and Tiona on this. It's true that, for example, from Data Europa Academy, we developed one specific course on how to incorporate open data into your application. Because from these competitions such as UDataton, we realized that there is a need to also have the use cases from these teams and know what was the process to transform data into an application or into a visualization, which is the case of the Rafael's project. So this information is available for you in case you wanted to explore and expand. But okay, I would like to hear from you, Rafael and Teona. How do you think this is possible to move from open data to an app? Do you have the perfect equation for that, or you can maybe explain to us from a use case how to move from open data to an application?
Tona, you want to go first, or?
You
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Yes, no, this is absolutely a fantastic question, and I'm pretty sure that there is not a single use case, so I can explain how we do it. And for example, taking the very concrete example of how we did it with the EU Data Fund. So the first step, of course, is to analyze if the data is available. And usually what I do, and this is my job in the whole web development process, is to create and establish the full data structure of the information that is available. The second step that I do is try to use unique identifiers to see if we can interlink the dataset with other types of data. This is, for example, the case that we did with another platform called TrackMyEU, where we managed to interlink information that was available on the European Parliament website about members of the European Parliament, basic information, together with the entire legislation that was published by the EU since the beginning of time. So it was a very, very big data set. But with this data structure, we can sort of start analyzing, sort of doing very light touch analyzing to see, okay, once we build the visualization platform, what kind of graphs, shares, percentages can we see that would be interesting for everyone? We know that in general terms, the top rankings are always quite good, but sometimes, and especially now, we go a little bit further because we could also just start thinking about, can we put certain types of indicator, like risk indicators, that are very important for the work at Transparency International. But once sort of like we have this kind of like basic overview, we go to the next step, which is a design document. Now, I think everybody has various ways of doing it. I think professionals do it with a wireframe. I go much more simply, and I do it in Publisher, which is because Integrity Watch functions a bit like a Lego brick system. It is actually relatively easy to understand, how everything interacts with each other, and we build a basic visual document that shows where all the graphical elements will be. Then the next step is to link every single parameter in the dataset. And to give you an example for the red flags tool, which has contract notices that are extremely rich in data, every parameter, link it to the visual overlay. And that took me upwards of 3 weeks to do. That was quite a big job. And the linking of this means that the developer then can simply sort of read line by line the instructions. And why we do it like this is that we are building a lot of tools, and for the developer, which is still Chiara Girardelli, she can build a visualization platform which before would take us a month, and now we can do one in 2 days.
Wow.
So we have a process of trying to accelerate this as fast as possible, and to make sure that the front end is built very quickly. And then we have a first demonstration version. Of course, there's a sequence of beta testing. We do closed beta testing where we invite people to look at the app, give us feedback, and try to improve the user friendliness of it slowly but surely, and we come to the end result. And this is also the process that we also use for the national platforms, because we're also the ones doing those. And then we actually have come with the barrier of different languages, and we also have tools to try to overcome this. And the latest platform was actually the one that was recently launched in Hungary, which interlinks public procurement with data from beneficial owners and company data. That's also quite interesting with risk indicators. So I hope this is sort of like the overview of how we work. But I'm sure many of you are probably having different processes, maybe more effective. As always, you have to bear in mind that my background is not web development, so this is something that we just invented from scratch when I was handed over the keys of Integrity Watch.
Good, thank you very much. I don't know if any of you would like to add something.
Thank you, Rafael. It was a very comprehensive overview, and I would say that most of the platforms which are based on data, I'm sure they go through all these some kind of procedures. And unfortunately, we don't have such kind of case when our data set was transformed into an API or some kind of platform, but I can share with you our plans about assets declarations of public officials in Georgia, because recently this platform was provided through API. We have been advocating for it for several years, and actually we designed some kind of, we created a concept how to interlink this data set with other existing registries, and how to somehow create red flags actually based on our analysis. And I hope that we will be successful in creating such kind of monitoring tool, and the procedures we will go through was already somehow elaborated by Rafael very comprehensively.
Yes, thank you very much. I fully agree, Tiona. Also, we have to also raise awareness about the importance of this Open Data Lab and other open data gateways that really advocate for open data and make it available in order to create such applications. So, in somehow it works. All together. Okay, I think we're arriving to the end of the session. Thank you very much. Just to mention to you that. 1 second, is loading the presentation. Okay, so there are more activities coming up. So we already had the webinar on data spaces happening a couple of weeks ago, and it's going to be continued. So keep updated via social media or social media on data.europa.eu or the publications office, but also to our newsletter. There's going to be more webinar series on the open data maturity dimensions, where we will invite other speakers, other countries, national representatives to speak about how they progress on the different angles. And then they're going to be like the last of the webinar series dedicated on use cases, where we will focus on the last priorities of the European Commission. In this case, it was a Europe fit for a digital age. But before you leave, please, as I was mentioning, your feedback is very important for us. We want to ensure that we provide the training material that you need, and we develop courses, webinars, trainings according to what are with the priorities that you may have. So please spend just 3 minutes to give us feedback. And with this, I wish you a very wonderful rest of the day on Friday and weekend. So thank you so much.